Hi guys. So recently I found somebody who had posed the question on Reddit of what do you think of people who don't read? They're obviously not referring to people who literally can't read. They're talking about people who choose not to read. And they followed that up with just, I'm just curious about it, and then a very happy face. And I started to look through the responses and they were super judgy. And I thought, this is hilarious. Let's experience it together. So we're gonna start off with the first one, who's pretty reasonable. They say, a bit like people who don't exercise, it's a personal choice, and I believe I am personally healthier for it, but someone not reading doesn't offend me. The next one says, people who don't read because they don't have the time, I couldn't live like that, but if they're happy. People who don't read and are proud of it, I actively dislike them. I get that as bookworms, we often say, oh my gosh, I just couldn't live without a book. Say things like that, and in my opinion, it's fairly exaggerated because obviously as long as you have food and basic needs, you can live. So this person saying people who don't read because they don't have the time, I couldn't live like that, but if they're happy. But if they don't have the time, then that means they literally don't have a choice. So if you were in a situation where you didn't have the time, then you wouldn't be able to read. Are you literally saying you would drop dead and die? Of course they're not, but it's a little much. This person says, my bassist writes lyrics for my band and has stated, I haven't read a book since 8th grade. I'm seriously considering just taking over the lyrics aspect myself. The fact that the person who writes the lyrics for their songs in their band is a person who doesn't like to read is hilarious to me. The next answer to the question starts off by saying, I have thought about this question for well over a year now. I just need to pause because are they saying that they saw this question on Reddit and thought for a year about it, or that they have been thinking about this and they found this question on Reddit and were like, I've actually been thinking about this the last year? Because if they saw this question, they pondered it for a year, that is one very thorough person. Anyway, they go on to let us know after a year the conclusion they've come to. I don't like people in general. That is very relatable. I get that. I don't like people in general, so take this with a grain of salt. I don't mind someone who is simply too busy to read. I myself often get to points that I don't read, but a short book for 4 or 5 months. I can accept that reading may not be for everyone. However, I do mind people take pride in hating to read. For whatever reason, it's become uncool or nerdy to read a lot. Hold on. When has it ever, isn't it always kind of been a little nerd? Since when has reading a lot not been equated to being kind of a nerdier pastime? I thought that was always the case. Maybe they're immortal. That could explain the taking a year to answer this question. Anyway, they go on to say, this genuinely pissed me off. I've always thought that literature best aids one on a quest for knowledge, and that intellect without knowledge is simply a waste of space. However, the same can be said vice versa. Stop licking me, Luna. I'm trying to record. Okay. I'm not one of those book snobs that thinks the only book worth reading is a nonfiction book. I'm not that kind of a person whatsoever, but the idea that, it gives you knowledge. Do fiction books give you a lot of knowledge? I don't know that they do. Next person agreed with them, and they replied saying, agreed. Some people simply don't like to read, and that's fine. But if you take pride in the fact that you haven't read a book since you were forced to in high school, you really need to take a good look at yourself. That's followed by somebody saying, exactly. I try to talk to people about normal things in life, and when reading and TV come up, most of the time we come to a stall, since a lot of people take pride on not picking up a book and consider it a great achievement to have followed several series of The Real Wives of insert name here, or whatever reality show they are following. I'm sorry if I take pride on not watching mindless TV, and we cannot talk about some more deeper/serious issues. Okay, this is exactly what I was expecting, and I'm really excited that it came up because I love it when people who primarily read fiction, like myself, that's basically what I read, when they give people a hard time for watching TV, reality shows, or just enjoying any other hobby that is also primarily for their personal enjoyment. It is so stuck up because we read, what fiction book have you read where you've picked it up and you're like, I'm reading this to gain knowledge so that I can talk about the deeper issues in the world. Really? You picked up a fiction book so you could talk about the deep issues in the world? Don't kid yourself. You are not better than people who watch reality television. And also, I just want to add, I've never met a person who has been prideful about the fact they don't read. I've never come across somebody who is like, yeah, I don't read. It's awesome. I've never encountered somebody like that. My dad isn't really a person who reads a whole heck of a lot. He's very much a man's man. He grew up working on farms. He loves doing stuff with his hands, being outside, working, watering his plants. He loves that kind of stuff. He's just not really a reader. And I've never ever gotten the vibe he's proud of it. If anything, I feel like he's afraid that people would think he's dumb or think he grew up very poor too. So I think in his mind, he would just assume that people would think negatively of him for not reading that much. And I feel like there are people like this that are the reason why. The elite snobbiness continues. This next one says, most, maybe all people who don't have time to read really just don't like/want to read enough to stop using as an excuse and make time. This, of course, applies to almost anything people claim they don't have time for, not just reading. And this person, I think, is saying this kind of thing as somebody who's always been privileged enough to have lots of spare time. Now, I'm not saying I'm not privileged enough to have spare time, because that's what we do when we read. We have some spare time. This person is trying to imply there is literally nobody. They say most, maybe all. No way, are you kidding me? Going back to talking about my father, this is a man who grew up so poor that he at some points in his childhood lived in hay barns and abandoned train cars as a kid with all his siblings. Like, you think that person would use the excuse of, I don't have the time for it because they just don't want to? No, they had such a crazy hard life. My dad grew up picking cotton and then going to school and then picking cotton, and he did it when he was like 8 years old to help the family make some money so they could eat. And this person has the audacity to claim basically that anybody who says I don't really have the time for it isn't actually somebody who doesn't have time. They're just kidding themselves. Now, I will stop for a second and say, yes, some people are people who will say, oh, I don't really have the time, when they just don't want to do something. I have most definitely come across that. But also, why does it matter? I mean, I feel like I understand the desire to have somebody just be upfront and honest and being like, I don't really like it. But then if they admit they don't really like it, then apparently they're like, oh, these people are just so prideful and not reading. Oh, stick to your reality shows. I mean, you kind of can't win. Some people just don't like reading as a hobby. That's kind of okay. Anyway, continuing, the next person, it's kind of a longer one, but they start off by talking about how they're 20 years old and they had this one job where they worked with a lot of people that were around their age or teenagers. So that's the setup. I'm sort of well-spoken. I can read quickly. I use correct grammar and all that jazz. But there were certain people who I liked. I considered them work friends. They were nice and funny to be around, who we'll call Group A. I found myself having to sort of dumb myself down a bit, explain things over in conversation. And then there were also the people who I could talk with like I normally did. Group B. Group A were non-readers. Say I mentioned I was reading The Hunger Games or that my favorite books were Harry Potter. Their response was always, I just saw the movie or movies, or I don't read. One person in Group A mentioned how she skimmed The Hunger Games and just read the last few pages for the ending. I lost a bit of hope for humanity for that because The Hunger Games isn't really a super long novel. Group B were usually the ones reading books in the break room or had e-readers with them on breaks. I could usually tell if someone was a Group A or a Group B just by talking to them for a few minutes. The mannerisms, but also what they brought up in conversation and what they liked to talk about. Group B readers talked about their distaste for such and such current event. Group A, non-readers, talked about Facebook and pop music. I don't think less of people who don't read, but if you don't read, it shows. Okay, I think that's a perfect one to end on. I think anytime somebody says, I don't think less of these people that care about trivial, unimportant things, I'm just saying it's obvious. Come on, you are thinking less of those people. Just admit it. You're pretentious. That's what this is. And I honestly would rather hang out with those people who just want to chat about pop music and have fun conversations about what they saw on TV versus people who think they're intellectuals because their favorite story is Harry Potter. Anyway, if you guys happen to stumble upon any funny articles or conversations online that you think I would get a kick out of or you want me to mention on my channel so that other people can see it, feel free to send it to me. You can send it to my Instagram. I'm at ebnovels. But anyway, let me know your thoughts on this, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.